Hey guys, waiting for a few more people to come on, but if you have any questions that you had on your mind, go ahead and post them up and we'll get to them. Good evening, Dennis. Yeah, tried to start at 7 on the dot, figuring this stuff out. When I start the live, I guess I need to have it pre-set up so that I can post at the same time to remind people. But I'm new to this stuff. Hey, Taysir. Taysir. Well, how's everybody's summer flow looking? Anybody got any nectar sources going for y'all? You might have noticed the picture on the start of it. That's pepper vine, and it's blooming right now in my area. It's blooming in West Tennessee and East Arkansas. Most likely blooming in North Mississippi, but I ain't been there to check. Um, Pepper vine is really good nectar source. Makes a lot of honey, and it's a native plant, but it's invasive. I mean, once it gets a hold on a ditch row, it'll just spread and spread. So it's good for animals, birds. It's excellent for pollinators. It's just a little bit of a problem for farmers because it's very hardy and spreads like wildfire. For mid Michigan. Y'all probably don't got pepper vine in Michigan, I'm guessing. Dennis Barney tested some honey today and it was exclamation point percent. Is that too low or is there a minimum high? What percent was that, Dennis? I don't know why I'm not seeing a number percent, man. Generally, anything under 18.5% is good. Really, anything under 16% gets hard to deal with. Um, oh, 15%. All right, I see you. Yeah, man, that's kind of hard to deal with, honey, when it's that thick. But if you have a heated bottling tank or something like that, or a honey warming cabinet, you can warm it up to bottle it, and you won't have any problems with viscosity. But if you're trying to bottle that stuff up in an air conditioned room, man, it'll be like pouring roofing tar up. But yeah, 15% is great, and that makes it great for lots of other applications like infused honeys, because you got a lot more wiggle room to to play with in your moisture content. A lot of these additives will add moisture to your honey, so you got a lot more room to play with. Makes excellent creamed honey. Low moisture honey does. So it's not a problem. It's just can be inconvenient dealing with honey that low percentage. And you can also always mix it with something higher, so 19% honey or something like that, and blend it up, and you'll come out pretty good. But yeah, hey, Anura, Pierce Beekeep equipment. That's Anura. He let me know. I think it was today that the cell protectors that I showed in the video, they'll be coming out on his website here pretty soon. So if you guys are interested in that, um, he'll have them up pretty soon. Dennis Barney. It was a cutout, and I had crushed it. It is stored at 100 degrees. I mean, at that temperature, you shouldn't have any trouble bottling that up, and it'll be good to go, in my opinion. But definitely, 15%. It's not unusually low, but it's pretty low. Let me see what the order of the topics was that I had. Start with summer nectar sources. So right now we have a lot of minor nectar sources in our area. Yellow sweet clover is a minor source here because of how much we have. We really don't have an abundance of that. But in other parts of the country, it's a major nectar source. If we had more of that, then it would be definitely a main nectar source for us. But we still have some vetch going, hairy vetch. Our primary nectar sources at this time are sumac, staghorn, and smooth, and pepper vine. Red vine has not bloomed yet. I had thought that it might had, but I haven't found it. Sumac, sumac makes a berry. Um, so does peppervine. So a lot of these nectar sources that are really good for the bees also are good for the birds. The pollinators pollinate them; they get an abundance of berries set on them, and then the birds spread them, and then we just have more and more of them. So uh, areas along power lines, railroad tracks, fence rows, and things like that can be really good spots to look for potential out yards for honey yards. Safe. Oh, was making sure it's safe. Yeah, Dennis. Anything below 18.5% is fine. It's when you start getting above that that you can have issues with fermentation, and fermentation brings its own set of problems. So before the hydrometer, what methods were used for guessing moisture? A lot of people still go by cappings. Um, it really depends on the area that you live in. A lot of areas you can go by that. They say if the honey is fully capped or mostly capped, that it's fine. It's got a great moisture content. In West Tennessee and East Arkansas, that is not always the case. I've seen fully capped honey ferment. Uh, honey pulls moisture out of the air, so it can still get in very humid areas get moisture into it from bad weather, lots of rain coming in, or just high humidity times. So that was one way that people went by the cappings. Um, Another way is shake test. If it don't shake out, which is very unreliable, um, but that's pretty much it. The capped honey was primarily what was pulled, and anything open was left. Again, that is regional because here in my area, our late summer honey often does not get capped. It doesn't need to be capped, and the bees don't cap it. And you may find 17% honey in the comb uncapped. So it's best to check it with a meter. Hey, Cayman, it's hot here too, man. If I had any cool weather to send you, I'd send it, but ain't got none. Thank you, John. I don't need all caps all the time, just if you're asking a question. That way it'll stand out to me from the chat. Greg Reynolds, this year my hive made it through the winter, but they were weak in the spring. I didn't feed until later in the fall. Do you think feeding earlier is important in having larger clusters in the spring? Uh, yes, it all goes hand in hand. I would ask what your mite regimen was, how you were treating, how your bees were testing on mites. Because if they're not healthy, they're not going to eat. A lot of times they might have food available to them, but due to viruses and other issues, they don't eat. That's when these stimulants can really be helpful. The like Pro DFM and even Honeybee Healthy, and there's all sorts of different additives that are on the market now that you can put into feed that stimulate the bees, and they make them eat. They make them um, clean, and when that's going on, they become much healthier and they get invigorated and they work better. So um, if they're sick and they're not feeling well, they're not feeling top notch. They don't have good gut health coming out of winter. They're not going to eat. It's not necessarily the feed, their honey stores or anything, and then they're not going to grow. They're just going to kind of spin their wheels. So a lot of that goes back to your mites. Can I go over the flyback split? I can't find the video where I saw it a while back. I can. I'll go over it in a brief way. Basically, you have a two box hive. It doesn't necessarily have to be A double, it could be mediums or whatever. You could do it with a single if you wanted. You just wouldn't get as much out of it. Um, so you have the hive in its original spot. You're going to slide that hive over. You're going to set a bottom board down, and you're going to put an empty deep box there. Now you're going to split this hive apart. It's much easier to find a queen if you separate the boxes. You don't want to chase her around the box, chase her from one box to another. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to separate the boxes, and then you're going to find the queen. You find the queen and the frame that she is laying on, and you put it into the new box that is in the old spot. Odds are that's going to be young brood and egg frame. If you so choose, you can give her another frame of brood. It's typically not necessary. A lot of people mess up with this split by trying to boost the mother hive too much, and they end up swarming anyway. Trust me, they will catch a gear and they will catch up faster than you would think possible. So you're going to give her that frame. You're going to give them a frame of food, and then you're going to give them the. You might consider giving her an empty comb, the most empty comb that you can find in that colony. The rest of it's going to be foundation, and you're going to feed this colony. Now, don't worry about how many bees are in that box. There's going to be a whole lot later. They don't have but the one frame of brood, so it's not an issue. All the foragers are going to return to this spot. They're going to fly back to their original spot. All of the old bees are going to leave this hive that is beside you. Now, this hive that is beside you has nothing but nurse bees, young bees, brood of all stages that will be hatching. They have all the food resources. They have everything that they could possibly need to make very good cells. They're going to make a bunch of cells. In 10 days, 10 days, you're going to go back to this hive and you're going to divide it up. Now, the flyback works well because you can use just one apiary. You don't have to have out yards for this. You can set these nukes down, and you're not going to have drift issues like you would using other methods. So now you're going to go in there and you're going to divide these up however many that you would like. If you want to split it hard, you're going to give them two frames of brood and a queen cell, and a frame of food and two foundation, which is a pretty decent split. Or if you don't want this many bees, maybe you're going to give them three frames of brood, four, whatever you choose to give them. Um, if the weather's cooperative and you really wanted to, you could do one frame of brood and one frame of food. But you got to remember that when you split that small, that those size colonies, if they do become queen right, they take a lot of work to get back to a viable size. But now you have a lot of mated queens, hopefully, after 28 days, 30 days. You're going to have a lot of stock to choose from and select from. That's where I like to do things a little different. I prefer to get rid of anything that I think is not up to par or is not to the standards that I want them to be. Not all these queens are going to get mated. Some won't make it back. The tanagers and the dragonflies will get them. Uh, of the ones that do, you're going to have some that you really like how they're going, and you're going to keep those. You may decide to get rid of your older queens and plug that nuke into your older hives. There's all sorts of possibilities that you can do. But essentially, that is the flyback split. So, what else do we got here? We have had a really strong smelling flow, Cayman says. When was it? I was moving nukes the other night, and it got to 1 yard. And privet's been over for a little bit, but the strong, strong smell of privet honey curing was just permeating the air. It was so strong. I knew exactly that was privet. And if you've ever been around privet honey when it's curing, it has a it's not an off-putting odor, but it is a distinct and strong, strong smell. Tessera, is good to add water inside the hive feeder or put some water source near the hive, or no need to give them any water, especially in this hot weather. Now, water is a huge consideration for me when I'm setting up a new yard. So I do think water is very important. If you live in a neighborhood area, you may want to provide water sources for your bees so that they don't find other sources that are undesirable for you, like pools and bird baths, or something's watering bowl, some pony or something. Um, so water is important. I have never personally tried to add water in the hive. I don't think that that would help very much. They like to come out and forage. I think that would go against. Um, I don't know really. I guess it could possibly work, but I think you'd be much more effective in just supplying them with a good water source or setting up your apiary where they do have a good water source. But it's very important when you're making honey to have ample water available to them, because the way that they cure honey is an evaporative curing. The bees fly out, they get a lot of water, they bring that water back into the hive. This is the way they cool off as well, um, and using that water in an evaporative way to cool the hive down. So water is extremely important to hive health and lots of processes. And if they don't have good access to it, then you are setting them back. Anywhere. Does mimosa have a strong smell? I think it has a smell. Um, when I think strong smells, I think of like goldenrod and smartweed, things off-putting types. But a lot of these honeys have an odor of some sort. It could be really pleasant and perfumey, or it could be um, almost a fermenty type smell, yeasty. Lots of pungent smells that can come from different nectar sources. Let's see. Peter says, greetings from a plane heading from DC to San Fran. Gus, can you explain the role of the cell finisher? Cell starter makes sense. I do not use a cell finisher because I don't like that process. My starter is my finisher. Wait till the cells are capped and then they move to an incubator. So for me, they don't make sense in what I do. I think the gist of it is so that you can free up your cell starter to start more cells, and your cell finisher will finish them off. This way, you get things done earlier. You lose a couple days allowing them to cap in the cell builder, but I don't think it's significant enough at an operation of my size that it matters. So I let them get capped, so the bees don't need to do anything to the cells anymore, and then those cells go into an incubator, and that works for me. Cayman says, I don't think it is a mimosa. Could be. Could it be basswood or sweet clover? Okay, so basswood is an interesting honey, and to me, it has a very mm, mint-like flavor. Uh, if you wasn't sure of it, you would almost think that they had got into some honeybee healthy, but basswood honey or linden honey. In the mountains, we call it lind. Um, it has a minty type flavor and odor to it as well. I don't think it's very strong. It's more of a subtle thing. So I wouldn't think that what you're smelling is basswood, but it is peculiar because I don't know of anything else that has such a minty flavor or odor. And clover honey really, to me, doesn't have a lot of, it just smells slightly floral. What do you think about summer mated queens? Example, July queens. I think that your summer queens are probably better mated than your early spring queens for sure, and possibly your late spring queens because the weather is much more suitable for queen mating. Um, and you probably have a lot more drones. So I think I would from that perspective of the quality of the queen, I think your summer queens are much more um, viable and probably better inseminated, and they just have more opportunity to take their mating flights and really get the mating flights and matings in that they need to be successful for years. So that's my opinion on summer queens. Maybe chestnut. Yeah, you know what? Chestnut's funky, and if you're around enough of it, and I believe it's blooming now. So yeah, Keith Faithful said maybe chestnut. And that's a possibility because it's funky stuff, um, and not nice honey. Let's see. DC's Blessed Bees question caught my first swarm call on the 8th. Did an inspection today. 3 to 3.5 frames of bees. They're bringing in nectar and a small amount of pollen. Also building comb. Didn't see a queen or eggs. You probably caught a secondary swarm with a virgin. So from the day that you caught it, I'd give them minimum of 2 weeks and up to about 3 weeks. And if nothing's happened after that 3 week period, then you need to do something. So that would be my suggestion, is to just wait 3 weeks and then check that hive. And if you do not have a laying queen in there at that time, then you need to bust it up and divide the resources up, because if it's not a laying worker at that point, it will be soon. And it's not going to happen if it hasn't happened at that point. At 2 weeks, you may catch yourself scratching your head and thinking, "Oh, well, maybe it could something happen." So it cut down on your checkbacks to just one time. Don't fool with it until you're certain that they're out of time, and then make your management decisions. The magnolia in my yard is full of bees. Is that honey known to you? And something, if so. Now they get in magnolias, but I don't see them getting nectar in magnolias. They're getting pollen. Now, when you're watching bees, take it a step further and look really closely at them and look at their legs. If they're not carrying pollen in their pollen baskets, then they're working that blossom for nectar. Um, and then you know that is a nectar source. If they have pollen on their legs, they're not going to switch roles. They're not out on a pollen run and, hey, I'm going to take a sip of nectar. They're doing one thing or the other. Um, so take a look. If they got pollen baskets, they're not working that for nectar. If they don't have pollen baskets on, then they're working that for nectar. But pretty sure they just work magnolia for pollen. Sorry. And I love to watch bees in magnolia blossoms because they're so huge and open. They're like a big white bathtub, and the bees will just be wallering around in there. It's pretty amusing. Same with mimosa blossoms. I don't know if all of you have seen mimosa blossoms, but they like stick up like all fuzzy, hairy, like wild, and the bees usually just like boom, just like fall into that blossom and get tangled up, and they like roll around and thrash in it, and then kind of get situated and start working it for pollen or whatever. It's pretty amusing as well. Takes them a while to get whatever they're trying to get out of a mimosa blossom. How long will they work sumac? Dennis Wilson. They will work sumac for a long time because there are many different varieties of sumac, and that sumac blooms a little bit different stages. Also, the age of your sumac will be staggered. You have some tall shrub-like trees that they're going to bloom big blooms first. Then you're going to have some younger growth that aren't as caught up with it, and they'll be getting a different stage flowering head, and then they'll bloom later on. So it's kind of a staggered out deal. It's like most your natural flows. It's probably not going to last more than a few weeks, but it's a good flow, especially in our area, because I know you, Dennis, you're over there in the Memphis area as well. So we have so much sumac around here. It's so dense, and it really creates an amazing honey flow. Cayman, you probably don't have many magnolias like we have around here that it would be significant enough that you would be getting an odor from anything. I wouldn't think. I'm originally from the other end of the state as well, and shoot, I can only remember one magnolia tree, and it was in somebody's yard. Um, Down here in the Memphis area, there are some huge old magnolia trees that are just absolutely massive. So lots of those around, especially in old neighborhoods. Let's see, what do we got here? What is the nicest frozen pizza to cook in the oven? Probably Red Baron. I don't eat a lot of frozen pizza. We have a really good place here. Well, lots of good places really, but my favorite is Aldo's. So I'm big enough as it is, and if I'm going to waste those calories eating something like pizza, it's not going to be on a frozen one. Da, da, da. Are old frames more than 3 years frames effects on quality of honey? Um, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I have some very old honey frames, and I don't think it affects the color or the taste or anything as far as just the age of the comb. I don't think it really imparts anything. It doesn't look as pretty in pictures when you have old black combs, but usually you can't tell after they're full of honey because they'll extend the cells out, cap it over white. It's beautiful, no issues. So I personally like older combs in my extractor because they don't blow out. Um, when you have fresh comb, if I have a full super of fresh combs, I have to be extra careful with those because one, going through the uncapper, they're going to get tore all to shreds. And then secondly, if they're not plastic foundation, then they're at a very high risk of blowing out in my extractor. So I think older, firmer, especially like 3 years old or something, that's perfect. DC's Blessed Bees, could I put a queen cell in it? I would not recommend you putting a queen cell in your swarm if it is queenless because the bees are older, especially if you've waited 3 weeks. These bees, um, if they do accept this cell and this cell gets emerges and the queen goes and mates successfully and she comes back, you're going to have a handful of bees is all you're going to have left. These bees are not living that long in the summer. You know, you're talking 4 to 6 weeks lifespan on these bees. Um, if you insisted on doing that, you would need to give them a frame of emerging brood as well, just so that they would have a start. It's really just a drain on resources for something that is not that great. You would be much better off to not Robin Hood it and give the weak resources, queenless resources, or whatever they are, to a stronger hive that's going to turn those resources around for you much faster. By giving those resources to a stronger hive, you're going to be able to pull off a split uh, much easier and better later on than you will fooling around with that colony that just it ain't going to make it. You know, you got to learn when to cut your losses. Yes, you can do things, and yes, they will be successful, but to what extent? You know, it just depends on how you're looking at it. Portage River Bee Company. My government inspector told me to avoid EFB. I should only use brood frames for about 4 to 6 years before replacing them. Any thoughts? I don't know of any correlation between the comb. The way I look at brood and other disease and pests that are in colonies is generally, I like to think that it's like staph on our skin. Everybody has staph. Under the correct circumstances, you can get a staph infection. I feel like European foulbrood is the same way. So generally, it takes an event or multiple events to stress a colony to make it manifest these European foul brood symptoms. So I don't think that it's the age of the comb. I think it's something that is with bees all the time, and sometimes it manifests and they have more symptoms of it and can't control it very well. I do think that some bees, hygienic bees, handle it much better and don't show near as many, if any at all, symptoms of it. But no, I don't think that personally, and I'm no scientist, and I don't have any studies, and I could change my mind like that if you provide me with a good study that has real, you know, data. But from what I know and what I understand, that's the way I look at it. I look at it as something like staph on our skin that, under the right circumstances, that's what could happen. Pierce Beekeeping. Gus, do you have meadow foam flowers in your area? So far, meadow foam honey is my favorite. The aroma is incredible. I have heard of meadow foam, mostly from California beekeepers. To my knowledge, we do not have it. Um, yeah, I don't know of any that I've ever seen. The only thing that keeps popping in my head is bottle brush, but that bees don't do nothing with that. It's like later in the fall, this old shrubby looking thing on the side of the road. Three boys bees. My bees were working fox grapes this morning. You know, a lot of literature that I have read will say that bees do not work grapes. I personally have also seen bees working those fox grapes, those possum grapes, wild grapes, winter grapes, frost grapes, whatever you want to call them. These wild grapes that grow everywhere, and I do think bees get something off of it. I don't think they get nectar off of it, but I do believe that they work them for pollen. Um, Peppervine that I was talking about earlier, peppervine is in the family of grapes as well, and they get a tremendous amount of nectar from it. So, Tennessee Small Waters to Small Woods. If you can think of one and a name, what book on nectar plants would you recommend? I would recommend, I think it's called Honey Plants of North America. It's an old book, and I talk about it in one of the book videos that I did on books. It's one of my favorite books. It's an old book, but guess what? We don't have any new plants. So I think it was published in 1921. Wickwas Press currently reprints it. I really like to support Wickwas Press because they're a small family business. And they put a lot of books out there that you wouldn't be able to find otherwise, beekeeping books, that wouldn't be available to us if it weren't for them reprinting these. So it's Honey Plants of North America, and it's a great big book. Excellent, excellent book. The OSU says bees get N and P from catalpa, no, nectar and pollen from catalpa trees. I have 50 on my farm, and the bees have never worked them. What do you think? So nectar sources can be the same, but not provide anything uh, depending on the regions. So in my area, bees do work the catalpas, and they do get nectar and pollen from them, and they do quite well on them, particularly in this this area of West Tennessee and East Arkansas. So yes, the bees do. Uh, Back on the eastern side of the state, I never really noticed bees work catalpa trees. So there's lots of variables you need to consider when you're looking at potential nectar sources. How appealing it is to the bees depends on what else is blooming at that time. So if there's something better out there and in more abundance, they're going to ignore it, whether they work it well or not. Bob Benny did a video on mimosa trees. Well, not specifically on mimosa trees, but in a recent video of his, he is discussing mimosa honey. Where I'm at, we have mimosa trees, but the bees don't really fool with them. You might see a couple bees here and there on the mimosas. I was talking about how they work the blossoms, but really not very many seem to choose that mimosa where I'm at. And then there's other areas where I've never seen them on there because they have all these other things that are great right now. They have all this sumac, they have all this peppermine, and they have the small wildflower types like vetch and cowpeas and yellow sweet clover, things like that. There's so many great nectar sources out there right now that they pretty much ignore the mimosas. So that may be the issue you're seeing with your catalpas. Um, they are in some areas workable. Um, Another thing you need to consider or should look into, it's very interesting, is soil. Soil has a lot to do with how much nectar uh, a plant can produce or will produce. The color of it, the aroma of it, everything to do with the tasting part of it that you experience. It has to do with the soil. Um, you can have the same nectar source up on the bluff in Memphis and the same nectar source in the river bottoms across the river in East Arkansas, or even on the same side of the river down in the bottoms along Millington. And that nectar source, say soybeans, will produce an abundance of nectar, make you a 100-pound crop. But 10, 20 miles away in the same county won't make a drop of honey. The bees would starve to death on it, on 1,000 acres of it. So soil has a lot to do with things as well. DC's bees, you're welcome. Um, a lot of people don't agree with me on that stuff, but I try to do what's most efficient and will give me the best end result. So Keith Faithful, when you have a failed queen nuke, do you use paper to combine to a weak hive? I do not. Um, the only reason I ever see to use paper on a combine is that you have a hive that has had a queen and you have removed that queen or killed that queen, and it still has a lot of pheromones and it has a reason to not accept. For me personally, when you have a queen-right colony and you have a queenless colony, this queenless colony is desperate for a chance at life. If they don't have queen cells or anything else in there and they're hopelessly queenless, they are going to be so happy to join up with this queen-right colony. There will be no fighting. There is not going to be an issue. They want to live, and this is their opportunity to live. So it's not an issue, and you don't have to do anything fancy to combine them. You can smoke them if you want. Generally, I never use paper, uh, so hope that answered your question. JL says they work the catalpa trees here in Kansas. What kind of soil do you got? I know the gumbo stuff over there in East Arkansas, where I'm finding the catalpa trees that I see bees all over. That may have something to do with it. It's very productive for um, soybeans and rice. Tennessee small waters to small woods. My bees worked mimosa hard until sumac bloom, then just wasps on mimosas. Exactly. So they found something better, and they will. Nectar. Cayman Reynolds says he did a nectar shake yesterday and strong smelling nectar out of his horizontal hive. What do you got blooming where you're at, Cayman? What are you seeing in bloom? So my other topic was agricultural flows. So I talked a little bit on soybeans. So in the delta, all the whole delta, all the way up to where I'm at in the upper delta, soybeans produce a very large quantity of honey. So much so that commercial beekeepers move into soybean fields for the honey crop. It's significant. But you have other areas of the country where they don't produce any, and you may read in forums or other literature where people will dispute if soybeans make nectar. But um, it boils down to the soil and the pH, and I'm learning on that. But soil is extremely important in that regard for that. So soybean is a crop that we really make a lot of honey off of here. Cotton is also another crop, so they go in rotations. A farmer may have a lot of acreage here, and it's gumbo soil or heavy clay soil, and they're going to rotate mostly rice and soybeans. So 1 year it'll be rice, maybe 2 years it'll be soybean, or however they choose. It also goes by the market. These crops are based off of the market, and what farmers can potentially make off of those will dictate what they will plant as well as the weather. In the lighter soils, with more sand content. They're going to rotate corn and cotton. If it's a little bit heavy, they may have soybeans in it as well. Some of my yards, they rotate soybeans and cotton and corn. Um, and some farmers do milo as well, which is pretty much like corn. Um, of all these crops, oh, I forgot wheat. Yeah, they also grow wheat over in East Arkansas. Um, of all these crops, though, there's only two that really benefit me as a beekeeper, and that is cotton and soybeans. Um, Pesticides are a problem, but you need to have a relationship with your farmer, and you need to understand this about pesticides. Like everything else, they're extremely expensive. So the way that farmers spray is not on a schedule per se, um, because they're not going to put out sprays and chemicals and spend all that money when it's not necessary. So they actually have uh, guys that are out there. Sometimes you'll see a crew of them. They'll be out there with bug nets and they're checking the threshold, the pest threshold, and whatever issue that they have. And if it doesn't meet that threshold, then they're not going to spray. So I get a lot of questions like that. When do they spray cotton? At what point do they spray cotton? At what point do they spray soybeans? They may not. Um, but when they do, you're not going to have a whole lot of time. They're probably not going to alert you, and if you do, there's not going to be a whole lot that you can do about it because they're waiting for that threshold. So it's a balance where you really want to be near crop, but not on top of it. You really want a buffer. Um, a lot of your farmers will be very reasonable because they're seeing a yield increase from your bees. My bees being there is going to give them around a 20% increase in their soybean yield, which is not insignificant. It's also going to give them around 15% increase in their cotton. So they want you there, and most of these guys will work with you. And the way that they can do that is you can ask them to spray with the ground rig. If they spray aerially, you're going to have a problem. Uh, there's really no way around that. If they spray with planes, with crop dusters, it's going to be everywhere. With a ground rig, they can control that. And they can also spray during times of the day that will least affect your colonies because there's very little nectar being put out at that time. So the bees are not attracted to the plants. So that's a little bit on agricultural. Uh, we have any more questions here? If we need to move a hive about 25 feet, how would you go about that? I would take the hive away from the property for 3 days minimum, and then I would move it back to the location where I would like for it to be. Otherwise, you're just going to have to deal with stragglers, and it's going to be a pain, and you're really not going to want to do that. If you don't want to move it that way, another way you could do it is go ahead and move that hive where you're going to move it and place a small nuke back there or weaker colony. Uh, then it'll be much easier to move away for the few days. But either way you go around it, you're going to have to move that colony away. Hope that answers your questions. We got any more questions, guys? I'm not seeing anything else other than the 25 foot here in the chat. So let's see what else. Y'all got any questions on agricultural flows? Does residue last from crop pesticide spray, or is it over in a day or two? No, it is not. It does last. It lasts a very long time. The neonicotinoids, they have a long life, so it's best to stay away from it. Um, and they do have a residue. It can, and you'll know. Bees are very sensitive to this stuff, and if you get spray kill, you're going to know you're having an issue. It's not like, oh, is it slowly building up in my colony or whatever. Um, if you get sprayed and you start getting spray kill, they're bringing it back. You're going to know it. It's not a guess. You're going to have piles of dead bees. So they either get it or they don't. Are there any labs responsible to check the quality of honey here in Memphis? Not here in Memphis that I know of. You can have it sent off. You can also agree to submit to testing for the USDA aphid. I mean, yeah, aphid and pest survey. They come out. They'll pull wax samples. They pull pollen samples, um, brood samples, all kinds of stuff. Um, but if you're looking to test it, you're probably going to have to send it off. I think there's some labs in Texas, in Florida as well, um, but none locally here in West Tennessee that I know of. Gus, did you say you used to live in Tennessee? I live in Tennessee right now. I'm sitting in Tennessee as we speak. I used to live in Southwest Virginia on the border, Tennessee, East Tennessee, and Southwest Virginia border there in the mountains. Now I live on the complete other end of the state on the well, in the Memphis metro area. It's a tri-state area as well. Dennis Barney, and a swarm is the queen that is left behind already mated. No, um, if a colony swarms away and the remainder bees you have a queen in there, she's going to be a virgin because the mated queen is gone. Tennessee small waters to small woods, buddy, in the middle of a lot of row crops, has had so many queen losses. I told him maybe pesticides in the comb. Um, it could be fungicides also have a lot of problems. You know, that's one reason I don't fool with berries. These berry orchards, we have a lot of large berry orchards around here, blueberries and blackberries and all that. And fruit tree orchards in general, they tend to spray a lot of fungicides, which impact your queens quite a bit and have a um, more of effect on her directly. I should say. Do you have any issues with yellow jasmine over in West Tennessee poisoning your hives in the early spring? Um, I see yellow jasmine in yards. I have not seen any out really in the fields and in the wild, so to speak. The only place that I see yellow jasmine is as an ornamental. I have not had any problems with it. It is a concern. I know it does well in the South, and they have it a lot in Georgia and Alabama um, as well. But so far, I have not noticed it. But it is something that, you know, if it started spreading a lot, it could affect, or it could affect a specific area. Three boys bees. What are your favorite ag crops for honey? Soybean first, sunflower second, cotton third. Uh, if we had anybody doing a lot of clover seed production, that would be awesome. Clover and alfalfa, but we don't around here. I wish we did, and then that would change my order considerably. But cotton, because of all the effects that it has, it makes an excellent quality honey. It's really good stuff. Soybeans is really good in general. Sunflowers, generally, you don't have any problems with sunflowers. I just don't like the taste of sunflower honey. I find it off-putting. Um, it's got a weird smell and a weird taste, and personally, I just don't like it. Todd Horting says, I mix frameless, drawn, and foundation in my supers. I'm getting some very large frames, and the frameless are falling behind. Any ideas to get drawn frameless honey? You use half sheet. Yeah, don't do what you're doing. It's on um, a management technique called checkerboarding. Um, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. Checkerboarding, the term checkerboarding is used so wrong most of the time. People think checkerboarding is putting foundation or empty frames in between drawn frames, and that is not what Walt Wright intended it to be in his definition. Checkerboarding is empty drawn combs between um, occupied, whether honey or brood. When you do what you're doing, you will get very fat combs and then weird in between. You need your empty combs need to be together. They need to be pushed tightly together. Um, use your drawn combs on the outsides, and your empty combs that are foundation and you're trying to get drawn out, they need to be pushed tight together. Uh, that's really the only way. Otherwise, you're going to get some really funky fat combs. So remove your big frames. And put all foundation, 10 frames of foundation or what have you. Um, at any rate, though, they need to be pushed together tightly until they're drawn out. Circle T Farm. A friend of mine has a pretty large farm in Tunica, soybeans, rice, and cotton. Mm-hmm. Tunica is a little bit different, or that part of the upper delta. The soil's a little different over there. Things are a little different. Farming culture's a little bit different. So they do things pretty similar to what's being done in East Arkansas, but not quite the same. The soil, I think there's a lot more gumbo in East Arkansas. West Tennessee farming practices are a little bit different because there's not so much land like North Mississippi and East Arkansas has. So you tend to have larger farms with one farmer, and the problem with that is if you have your bees on 1,000 acres of soybeans, then you got to have so many bees on there, and then the bloom is over. Um, when you can be around multiple farmers, it stages your flow out, it staggers it. So that's why I like those kind of areas. I mentioned wheat. So wheat does nothing for the bees, but wheat is great when I see wheat, because when I see wheat, I know that my bees will have a longer flow because they're going to chop that wheat. They're chopping it now, and they're going to replant that in soybeans. And it's going to be late in soybeans. So as my early beans are done and they're setting their pods and all that, uh, this crop is going to come on, and it's going to add another month to my flow. Let's see here. Craig Midget gave some information on honey and pollen sampling. How many years can you reuse the wax on the honey frame? Man, until you can't. That's that's the way I do it. I don't foresee any real problems. I don't think you're going to have risk of buildup more in your supers. I run queen excluders, so my supers are really clean. Um, I run them until they don't hold honey. If they hold honey, they go in a box because I'm always needing supers. I don't have enough. So what else did I have on here? Oh, dealing with the heat. So I had a good response to my video on some management techniques with the honey supers and ways to uh, keep bearding minimal. I appreciate all the views and likes on that. Um, so if you have a honey flow on, you can get by with a lot more than if you don't. If you still have supers on and you're in a dearth and you're worried about it, I would still recommend that you prop your tops. Not your supers. I wouldn't offset my supers because you're going to provide too much openings for the bees to defend. But if you're seeing a lot of bearding, giving them some upper ventilation is going to help to provide some circulation and a natural air pull throughout the colony. If you're using a telescoping cover with a inner cover, I recommend that you find pencil size or around that size stick, and you put them on the corners of your box and then set your inner cover on it, and then prop your telescoping cover on a lid. So your inner cover will be here, your telescoping cover will sit dead flush on top of it, not like this, but dead flush on top of it. You can also slide your inner cover back so that you have just the bee space along the entire front of the super, and then prop your lid up on an angle again, flush this way. This is going to provide a large upper entrance, but if it's a strong colony, they're going to be able to defend that, and it's going to allow for air circulation through the hive, and you're going to see those beards shrink quite a bit. How do you handle the heat for yourself as a person? I would say keep your colony count manageable to what you can do without hurting yourself. There's really not a whole lot you can do if you're doing this for profit or as a business. I don't want to be like suck it up, buttercup, but it's hard work and it's agricultural work, it's farming, and it's outside. So if you're running a lot of colonies, there's not a whole lot you can do, but toughen up and get your work done. Um, when it's 116-degree heat index, a neck fan and all that stuff, it ain't going to do you a whole lot of good. Um, so if you're just a hobbyist or you got some backyard colonies, plan your work. Do it early morning, as soon as the sun comes up. Be when it's dark and dusky out there still. Have your smoker lit. As soon as the sun comes up and you feel good, then get out there and get working and get it done quickly. Have a plan on what you're going to do. Ventilated suits help a lot, but they're also very heavy. Um, so use a lot of smoke. If you use smoke and you smoke the right way, you probably get by with a jacket. Drink lots of water, stay hydrated, and just get your work done. But if you're doing it on a larger scale, I don't really have any advice for you other than have a good air conditioner in your truck and have your yards far enough apart that you can get cooled off. Uh, Otherwise, it's just miserable. Gus, do you feed a non-production hive sugar water to draw a comb? If there's a flow on, then I don't feed them. No, I let them like my resource colonies. I just stack them up, and they're using that nectar flow to pull wax out, and I'm not really concerned about honey production for them. But if you have a good nectar flow on, and you have a even reasonably strong colony, they're not going to take that sugar water. They'll just wait. It'll end up fermenting or something on you, and they won't take it because they much prefer that nectar. If you have some two frame splits that you did and they're weak as water and they don't have the population to forage, uh, yes, I would feed those until they had a round. It will probably take about 2 rounds of brood before they even have anything strong enough to be able to get out there and work. Having trouble getting bees to build comb on plastic frame supers. It probably has to do with the wax on them. Not every manufacturer is equal in that. If they're older frames, they're not. They usually don't have the coating kind of diminishes, I guess. So you may need to recoat these in wax. Um, and if you don't have nectar flow going, then they're not going to draw them out. So, but if you have a nectar flow going on and you're still having trouble with your comb, with your plastic foundation, I mean, um, you need to take a look. If it does not, or if there's another issue with the wax, you may contact the manufacturer wherever you bought them from. Was hoping for a young man's tricks. Man, tricks for the heat. It's just stay, drink plenty of water. Drink your Gatorade. And if you feel like you're going to pass out, get out of the heat. Uh, Other than that, you got to get it done early and have a plan on what you're doing. Well, guys, we got any more questions? Any questions on crops or honey flow? Do you know of any reason bees would not work sourwood? The elevation, soil too far south or north, maybe. Yeah, there's lots of reasons bees don't work sourwood. Sourwood does not produce every year, period. I come from a sourwood area um, in Southwest Virginia. It's a very good area for sourwood. Um, Sourwood does not make a crop every year. One of the first things the old beekeepers taught me when sourwood is starting, you go out there and you pluck the bloom out and put it on your tongue. If you get a drop of nectar out of it, then you're probably going to have a decent crop. Some years you do not get a drop of nectar out of it, and if the flowers are dry, not going to happen. You have to have the elevation. It's made in the mountains. Even as bad as you want it to be, you could plant 100 acres of sourwood here in West Tennessee, and it ain't going to make you no honey. Um, so it's a specialty crop. That's why it goes for a premium. So it's a beautiful tree, but don't waste. Uh, if you're not in like the southern highlands area of the Appalachians, which is a very small area of West Virginia, Southwest Virginia, Eastern Tennessee, and Western North Carolina, even on down to northern Georgia. Um, there's a highlands area. It's where the real hillbillies are from. Um, if you're not in that area, you are not going to make sourwood honey. So it just ain't going to happen. What nectar sources should we see after sumac? Red vine. Red vine will be after sumac, and depending on where you're at, you may still have some clover and stuff going. But if you're in a lot of heat, then it's going to fry that clover up. So pretty much after that red vine, as far as natural nectar sources, there's not going to be much until the late summer when the fall flow begins. Um, unless you're considering row crops, and then you could very well have after sumac you have soybean, cotton, and sunflowers. But otherwise, um, sumac's about it for most places. I think I'm caught up on these questions. What do I think about planting vitex for a late summer source for honey? I think it's an excellent idea. I've had bees on Witten farms for years. Jill Forrester, she is a flower farmer, and she has um, I don't know how many acres of vitex trees it would be altogether, but she's got a few different hedgerows on her property that are dense and very long with mature vitex trees. She snips the blossoms for bouquets, which one of the great things about vitex is that it will rebloom. It will bloom all summer when you cut those blossoms off. It makes a wonderful honey, very light floral honey that is very popular with my customers. Um, I think Vitex is awesome. The only bad thing I can say about Vitex is that it is not a native. Um, you do see it a lot in Texas and Oklahoma where it is pretty much naturalized, but it is considered non-native. It is not really invasive. It'll spread in its own area, but I don't see it going too wild. It hasn't for me anyway. Um, Vitex is amazing source for nectar in the summer, and it is in full bloom right now. That's its first blooms, and if you were to go out and snip those off now while they're still beautiful and the bees have worked them, it's going to form another flower head. Personal question. You don't have to answer, but does your wife like the bees? Mess with them? She does not dislike bees, but she is afraid of bees and any kind of flying insect. So she does not work bees. She has helped extract honey and things like that, but she is not much for being out there with them buzzing all around. How do I find my properties for bee yards? When it's raining hard and the ground is wet and I can't do a whole lot of other things, I drive around to potential areas. I look on Google Maps for potential areas that I like, looking for water sources and wetland areas, ditches and bayous, um, things of that nature. Find a suitable area or an area that I like. Then I start looking for access. So it's important to look for your access after a big rain or during a big rain, because then you can see how tough it's going to be for you to get into that yard. If you're going to have problems, where does the water stand? Are you going to have any flooding issues? Um, and generally, where you want to put your hive stands, that's going to be in the dry, and that you're going to be able to drive up to. Once you've done this, then you can get on your county tax assessor's website or whatever, and look and find who owns that property. Um, you can go around and knock on doors and ask. That's getting a lot less popular here lately. Some people will not appreciate you doing that. Um, a good way to do it is to leave a letter on the porch or something like that, a card, a jar of honey, something like that. You may waste some jars because it's not the person's property or they're a renter or something like that, and they don't tell anyone. It requires a lot of legwork and hustling to get those really good yards. I would not recommend going around looking for other hives and then trying to put bee yards right beside them. Um, that's a pretty shady practice. I know a lot of people do that. That's not a good way to make friends. Most people, they have if they have many yards, they have them spaced to a certain extent for a reason, for it to work with their bees and as they're expanding. So um, it's not property you own or you're entitled to, but I think it's just common courtesy to respect other beekeepers. Uh, Turf, which there's it's kind of an unspoken thing. I think most people respect it, but you do have your guys that just do what they want to do. What's your hive to resource hive number? I would say, like, I don't know, um, 2 to 30. What does your When does your sumac bloom and how long does it last? It is blooming now. Typically, it blooms in June in the first couple weeks. It will last on to the end of the month. And probably a little bit longer, depending on how much and what types of sumac you have around. But generally, for the month of June. How are the T-post mating nukes going? They're going great. I really like them. I've had some good successes with them. Getting queens back. I like not bending over. They're very sturdy. Um, I don't I don't see a cow knocking them off, even headbutting, scratching on them. I just don't see it happening. I tried to rip one off a T-post and I ripped the plywood off of it. The actual T-post mount itself is not coming off until you loosen that set screw. If you do get it off, you're probably going to hurt yourself. Um, so I like them a lot. I'm going to have a bunch more made, and I think that's the direction that I'm going to go in with my mating nukes. So I'm very pleased with them. The purple flower soybean produces more nectar than the white. I planted 500 acres of the purple this year, and we get 20 to 30 more bushels to the acre. Where the bees are, I have 30 hives. That's interesting. I haven't personally noticed too much difference, but it's hard for me to do that because I have multiple farmers around. So they have access to the white and the purple, all within this, across the road. It's hundreds of acres of purple, and this side of the road it's white, and then on this next field's cotton. So it's hard to really distinguish. But that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I do think that they tend to like purple and blue blossoms better. Most of the things that they like the most are purple or blue blossoms. So that makes a lot of sense. Does rain cause an issue with your offset supers? It absolutely does not cause any problem whatsoever. That is a very common question I get about that, but it don't bother it. Skunks can't mess. Excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. Had some inappropriate stuff going on in the comments. I don't appreciate that kind of stuff at all. Um, anyway, I have a mixed race family, so that kind of stuff gets to me. Uh, let's see. Have you heard of people treating mites with vaporized mineral oil? Man, that's some old stuff. There, it was. I think the Fat Bee Man popularized that. It does absolutely nothing. It's a waste of your time and it's hazardous to your health. So please don't do it. Yes, I do see cone building slow after the solstice. Definitely. Earlier in the, God dang it. Uh, Solstice. So, Circle T Farm, I do have some moderators. That's who took care of the last one. Um, if somebody would like to volunteer, I'll add you to it. Anyway, the solstice. Earlier in the conversation, I was talking about the bees not capping the honey later on. And that's a big part of it. Our summer honey flow. We make a lot of honey in the summer. The bees don't cap it over usually later after the first pull because usually we get a first pull and a second pull on our summer crop. So yeah, I do see it slow down considerably after the solstice. I think that if I didn't have as much drawn comb as I did, I would not make. I think that's a key to late summer flows. You need to have um, pulled out comb. So we were talking about agricultural flows. This year, I've talked about it. I had some troubles this spring, and a lot of people did have troubles this spring. Everything was delayed. The buildup was way behind. We had a lot of problems. I've heard from a few of my farmers now, that they've returned their corn seed. We do not have much corn planted at all this year that I've seen. I was asking some of my farmers about that if it had to do with the market, and it, pretty much like we had. The same issues with delay and with the rains and everything and the cold weather, the way things were going, it really set them behind. So the bad spring is going to equal a very good summer for me because it's delayed and they've had to plant more soybeans because of this. There'll be later soybean crops because of this. So it's going to extend my flow out now from pretty much, end of May all the way on through um, gosh, well into August and further. So yeah, I don't test for mites throughout the summer, Brian. I wait until I pull my honey supers. When I pull my honey supers, I do my mite washes, and that's when I treat as quick as I can. It's a real inconvenience because I got honey and I'm trying to do that, but because we have such a late honey flows, it's important that that's when I treat. Now I only treat once annually, but that's the best time for me to do it. And because I run singles, that makes it a lot easier as well because all the bees are condensed down into one box. You guys got any more questions, or is that it? We're gonna wrap it up. What month am I generally treating for mites? Generally October. What I what do I use to treat for Varroa? I use an amatraz based product. Apivar is very good. I think that's what works. I don't fool around with other stuff. That's the only product that I use. Aside from that, I run Russian bees that show a lot of mite resistance. I select heavily for mite resistance. I do run a test jar, treatment free, and always have. Um, so genetics and selection process and a decent treatment that allows me to get by with just treating everything once a year. I do sell queens. I don't sell as many as I would like to get into doing. I'm working on developing that part of my apiary more. Mostly, I just sell locally as I can. But yes, I do sell queens. Have I had bees on buckwheat? And do they gather more nectar or pollen? I have had bees on buckwheat, and I think they gather a lot more nectar than they do pollen. They do well off of it, and it's a good crop, a good cover crop. Brian says, "Thanks, Gus. Great information as always, and thanks for sharing. Sorry for the trolls. I know it can be frustrating. Uh, yeah, it's expected. It's just sometimes I don't know. Racial stuff kind of throws me off my game. Um, I am a hothead, believe it or not, and as a redheaded person, it gets my blood pressure up. You probably saw me change a couple shades, but it's best to not let stuff like that get to you when you can't do anything about it. Because I can't reach through this screen and choke anybody, or God knows I would. So, oh, I didn't know I could do that. That's the first uh, money I've been sent through that. Thank you, Brian. Let's see. Thank you for all the videos, but don't let the trolls bother you. The Beekeep family is strong with you. I appreciate that, man. Like I said, I am a temperamental person, and I don't mean to, but I'm very easily uh, thrown off with stuff like that. So I apologize uh, to you guys. Gus, the flyback split. It's the same for 8 frames as 10. And can you do it in July in Tennessee? You can do it anytime that you want as long as your colony's built up enough. You can do it with stacked nukes. You can do it's just the principle of the matter. The main purpose of it is to really curb the swarming instinct or impulse rather in your older queens because this is going to reset her. It's like hitting the reboot. Boom, you just restarted her. They're going to jump. They're going to draw that box out, and she's going to do great, and she ain't going to swarm on you. Um, but it's important that you really don't give her a whole lot, and it just completely resets her because I mean she don't swarm with frames of brood. So um, yeah, so just whatever you can get resource wise, it just depends. You know, you may pull 4 splits off of one, you may pull more than that, or you may just get two or something. You know, it just depends. But it's very adaptable um, and easy to change it up however you want to. The main points are is that it's going to help control swarming in your older queen, and it's going to produce better quality queen cells than a walkaway split. Jay says, "Thanks for the info. Love to know when you have more queens to ship. I'm interested in one or two anyway. Um, I may start shipping some next year. Right now, I'm mostly just working on developing my clientele locally. I live in the Memphis metro area, so there are a lot of beekeepers around. So I have a lot of local demand, and I don't produce enough queens yet for that. I'm hoping to grow into to being a full fledged queen breeder one of these days. Right now, I'm still working on my stock, but I'm really pleased with them. And if I can get my system down the way I want it to be, and the equipment the way I need it to be set up, and have enough of it, then I think I can do it. Wayne's honeybees. I did a split last Tuesday. Moved the queen frame and 2 cat brood frames. Looked today and half the frame of bees and no queen. Split was only 2 hives down. So I figured. Do you think she absconded, or do you think she went back home, or what was it? I'm not quite sure what you mean in there asking. Um, Bill Lee, I do not ship queens currently. Um, it's not something I've got into. For me, all of my early queens goes into nuke production for myself and for my customers, and then it's summertime when I'm producing queens. So I'm kind of concerned about shipping and everything. It's really hot and they don't fare well in that. So I do local pickup and it does fine. I know that once I start producing the amount of queens that I want to do that will contribute significantly to my income the way I want it to, I will have to ship. So I got to get that all situated out. Three Boys Bees, have you gotten your Hive Life tickets ordered? Yes, I am down. Definitely. Cayman's a good friend of mine, and I made sure that I was on the list right away. What do I think happened? Wayne's honeybees. I really don't have enough information. I'm trying to guess what you're talking about. I would guess that they either swarmed away with a very small handful of bees, um, or it's possible that they absconded in some way or went back. It's really hard to say right now. Uh, if you're really hot in a hot area or and having really hot weather, if your nuke wasn't ventilated enough or maybe reduced too much, then they very well could have absconded. Um, that's my best guess, man. Learning to write left-handed had shoulder. I sympathize with you. I worked on the rigs for a number of years and pulling them slips, man. I pulled this shoulder apart a couple times, so I sympathize for you. I wasn't picking at you. It's hard to say. I was going through nukes the other day, and I had one wrote down ready to go, ready to sell, and I was checking back. I flipped up on the top, and there wasn't nothing but a handful of bees in there. They absconded for some reason. I don't know if it was too hot. It was this week when this heat came up. That particular nuke was pulled out a little bit from the shade of the tree line, so it's possible it was just cooking and couldn't stand it no more. But they left all kinds of brood. They weren't diseased or there was no small hive beetle or anything. They left 4 frames of brood and uh, just a handful of bees. Yeah, it very well could have absconded. Some of them, they don't like what they got going on. Um, I worry about robbing to an extent, but ventilation is more important because sometimes when you live in an area that has temperatures like we get down here, you got to do something. Because I mean, you may go out there and there'll be wax pouring out the entrance, just have massive comb failure. It can be a problem. I prefer full sun, but I try to position them in ways where they do get a break at some point in the day. I prefer morning sun because they get started earlier. I can't do full shade because we have small hive beetles so bad here. If I do full shade, I notice a significant increase in the problem of small hive beetles and the numbers that I have. The heat on the top of the hive drives the beetles back down into the bees where they will deal with them. Uh, because it's hot under the lid. So I need them to have a lot of sun because beetles are just disgusting down here. You give them half a opportunity and you'll have a hive just covered up. I suppose shade cloth could work. Back in the mountains where I'm from, a lot of times you'd see a stand of bees. They'd have uh, you know, 4 posts and a couple pieces of tin over them. Um, it really just depends on what you're doing, what size, and what's sustainable for you. I really couldn't do shade cloth um, with my operation, but The bees do well regulating the heat with a little bit of help from me. So I'd rather have them in full sun. Well, guys, it's we've been on hour and a half almost. If y'all got any more questions, shoot, and if not, we'll just wind it down. I've posted a couple shorts recently. I've also posted a video also this week. So if you haven't watched those, check those out. There's some good information there, and some more coming. I have some pieces, video pieces that I'll be compiling on crops, soybeans, cotton, all that stuff, and how it affects me as a beekeeper, and how the flows look on that. And that's about it, really. Well, guys, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate. Well, there's one question: do you split after you pull honey? I do not. Like I said, my flow's so late that it doesn't work for me that way. I don't have a problem with late splits like that, but for me, I'm already in single brood chambers, um, and the lateness of my honey flow, it just wouldn't work for me. I have full entrance on my hives with offset supers. So I have a full entrance, and then I have what equates to a full entrance front and back on each super because they're offset roughly about that much. And no problems because we have quite a flow going on and we'll have for months. Well, I'll make sure, Brian, to try to do better on posting heads up and post on it. Uh, I appreciate you guys a whole lot. I really do. And if you have any other questions, you feel free to post them in comments or hit me up on my Facebook page or whatever, or save them for next time. But I'm going to wrap it up, guys. Thanks for coming on.